In Rome, near the end of Sulla's dictatorship, a 14-year-old boy is brought to the most dangerous house in the city. His name is Marcus Porcius Cato. Sulla had known the boy's father, and he sometimes asked to see Cato and his brother, a favour he gave to very few people. Their tutor, Sarpedon, believed that these visits brought honour and safety to his charge, so he kept bringing Cato back. That judgment made sense in the Rome of the time. Sulla held the city by fear, and a little goodwill from him could shelter a household. Yet the shelter came with a peculiar condition. To receive it, the boy had to enter the house where the fear was being made. The house did not conceal what Sulla's power meant. People were brought there to be tortured. The heads of men known across Rome were carried out. Those waiting nearby heard what was happening, and their fear came out only in groans they tried to suppress. The place had become an underworld in the middle of Rome. A child could see adults arriving under guard, could see what was carried away, and could hear respectable Romans forcing their own voices down because an open sound of grief might be noticed. Sarpedon had brought Cato close to power. What the boy found was a room full of people who had learned that survival meant staying quiet. Cato had always been difficult to frighten into agreement. He obeyed Sarpedon, but he wanted the reason for every instruction, which is a demanding habit in any student and a particularly awkward one in the house of a dictator. Here was a question no careful adult wanted asked. Rome contained senators, soldiers, magistrates, and whole families with old names. Yet Sulla remained in command, while men were carried into his house, and other men lowered their eyes. The adults understood the machinery around them, the guards, the punishments, the families that would answer for one person's courage. Cato saw the same danger, but at 14 he had not learned to treat it as an answer. So Cato asked his tutor why nobody killed Sulla. Sarpedon told him that men feared the dictator more than they hated him. The answer only moved the boy to the next question. Why then had Sarpedon not given him a sword so that he could kill Sulla himself and free his country? The tutor heard the words and saw the anger in Cato's face. After that, he watched the boy closely whenever they were near Sulla, afraid that Cato might actually attempt the thing he had proposed. It is an alarming little story, not because a 14-year-old had discovered a workable plan, but because fear had already trained an entire city to accept what the child still found impossible to accept. The Rome that Cato grew up in after that visit was a city that ran on appearances. Every public moment was a performance, and the performance had rules that every Roman of standing understood without being taught them, the same way a person learns to flinch before they learn to name what startled them. A man's toga told you his wealth, the width and colour of his stripe told you his rank, his shoes told you his family, and the quality of the leather told you how recently the family's money had arrived. The litter he travelled in, the number of attendants who walked beside it, the way he stepped out of it when he reached his destination. All of it was a language that everyone spoke and everyone read, and nobody questioned, because questioning it would be like questioning the usefulness of breathing. The penalty for getting the language wrong was immediate and social, and felt exactly like danger. even though no one was going to die from wearing the wrong shoes to a dinner party. A senator who arrived at a public function dressed below his station was not simply underdressed. He was broadcasting incompetence, signaling that his judgment could not be trusted, inviting the room to wonder what else he had gotten wrong. The flush of embarrassment a man felt when he realized that his toga was the wrong weight or his litter was too plain was not a considered opinion. It was automatic, a reflex fired by the body before the mind had time to evaluate whether the threat was real or whether the whole system of signals was worth taking seriously in the first place. Cato began training his body against the ordinary arguments of comfort. He exercised in heat and in snow with his head uncovered. When he travelled, he went on foot in every season, even while the friends beside him rode. He did not turn the journey into a lonely display. He moved from one mounted companion to another and talked with each of them as they went, a walking officer holding a conversation with men on horseback. The ground changed, the weather changed, and the practice remained. He was teaching himself that discomfort could arrive without being promoted at once into a command. He did something similar with clothing. A vivid red-purple had become fashionable among Roman men who could afford to be noticed. So Cato chose a darker shade and wore it until it was worn out. The choice was plain enough to be seen and small enough to be repeated. He did not need a special costume or a speech about simplicity. Other men reached for the colour the city had agreed to admire. Cato reached for the darker cloth. In a society that could turn a stripe of dye into rank, taste, and belonging, the quiet refusal carried its own weight. At times he went out into the streets after breakfast without shoes or even a tunic. It was not his uniform every day, and it was not a claim that cold stone had stopped being cold. It was practice. Rome placed great value on the opinion of the street, especially when the street was crowded with people whose opinion might become a vote, an invitation, or a rumour by supper. Cato deliberately gave that opinion less work to do. He let himself be seen without the ordinary protection of dress and rank, then discovered that the mourning continued. The point, as his habits show it, was not that weather, fatigue, or embarrassment became unreal. Cato still had a body, and his body still received the day exactly as bodies do. He was trying to reserve shame for what was actually shameful, and to spend less of it on other people's low opinion. That is a narrower ambition than becoming fearless, and a more useful one. The first reaction could still arrive. The cold could still bite. A glance could still be noticed. But none of those things had to finish the decision for him. When he served as a military tribune in Macedonia, Cato brought the same habits with him. The friends and servants in his party rode while he travelled on foot, moving from one horse to the next to keep each rider company. In camp he shared the tasks he gave his soldiers and kept his dress, daily life, and conduct on the march closer to theirs than to the display of a commander. He still used authority, reward, and punishment, but the men could see that he accepted the work he assigned. When his service ended, they sent him away with tears, embraces, and their cloaks laid on the ground before him. By the time Cato returned to Roman public life, the strange habits had acquired consequences. He spoke plainly, opposed measures he believed were unjust, and made himself difficult to divert with favours. The city did not stop finding him severe. Even friends could find him exhausting. But the darker cloth, the miles on foot, and the mornings without shoes had never been meant to make him charming. They had been rehearsals for the hour when comfort, reputation, or company asked him to surrender a judgment he believed was honest. Tonight we're out at White Rock, with the creek running somewhere below us in the dark. Welcome to Sleepy Stoicism. I have been thinking about that kind of training. Not the public, political kind, but the private kind. The kind your brain puts you through every night, whether you signed up for it or not. You know what it is like when your mind starts running a program you never asked it to run. You are lying in bed, and it picks up a number. Your savings balance, the cost of something that is wearing out, a bill that is coming due in a month or a year. And before you have noticed what is happening, it has added 4 more numbers to the first one. And now it is projecting forward, calculating what you will need in 5 years, and whether 5 years is something you can even count on. And you have just handed over 15 perfectly good minutes of your evening to a column of arithmetic that adds up to nothing, because the answer is not available tonight and might never be needed. The flinch is real. Your body fires it without asking permission. The spike of worry, the tightening in the chest, the urgent feeling that you need to solve this problem right now, even though the problem will still be exactly the same size in the morning, and you will be better equipped to look at it then. But following the flinch down the hallway, running the numbers, rehearsing the conversation, adding up the cost of something you cannot buy or fix or finish before sunrise, that part is optional if you catch yourself in time, not if you stop the flinch. Nobody stops the flinch, but if you notice it fired and choose not to follow it into the next room, that is the work. Cato spent his entire life on it. A man once struck Cato in the face. For a Roman public man, a blow carried more than pain. Honor was watched by other people, and an insult could seem to demand an answer before reflection had even entered the room. The body flinched, pride supplied the meaning, and custom stood ready with the next move. Cato did not retaliate. He did not even make a display of pardoning the offence, because that would still have granted the insult a place of importance. He ignored it. That does not make the strike harmless, and it does not make every refusal to answer an injury wise. It shows something more particular. The other man could choose the blow, but he could not force Cato to build the rest of the day around it. Cato was struck, and he declined the part of the injury that required his cooperation. He did not turn one person's impulse into his own next instruction. Whatever anger or pain came first, the sequence stopped with him. That was not passivity. It was a refusal to let another man's loss of control determine where his own attention went next. Before Cato became quaestor, he read the laws governing the office and questioned men who had already held it. He wanted to understand its authority before he accepted its title. That preparation mattered because the permanent clerks knew the public accounts and treasury law far better than the young elected officials sent to supervise them. An inexperienced quaestor arrived for a short term and needed the clerks to teach him his own work. In practice, the assistants had become the superiors. They held the memory of the place, the procedures, and the confidence that another ambitious young man would soon move on. Cato entered that arrangement with enough knowledge to treat the clerks as assistants again. Sometimes he found deliberate abuse, and sometimes he found mistakes born of habit or inexperience. He prosecuted one senior clerk for a breach of trust involving an inheritance and brought another to trial for fraud. The second man had an impressive defender, Catullus, a censor admired for justice, but Cato would not let reputation decide the case. When Catullus began asking openly for his client to be spared, Cato reminded him that a censor was supposed to examine other men's conduct, not ask the treasury to overlook it. The clerk escaped conviction by a single vote after an absent official was carried in on a litter to cast it. Cato still refused to employ him or pay him from the treasury. That was how the year proceeded. The clerks tried to win over the other quaestors and resisted the man who had disturbed their authority. Cato kept learning the office, correcting genuine errors, and refusing the convenient arrangements that had made the treasury comfortable for the people who knew how to use them. He found that many people had owed the state money for years, while the state itself owed money to others. Cato pursued the first debts and paid the second. Men who had expected to avoid repayment were required to pay. Men who had stopped expecting the treasury to honor what it owed finally received it. The arithmetic was ordinary. The change was that both sides of it were allowed to count. He also blocked false decrees and improper documents that earlier officials had accepted to please influential people. A name, a friendship, or a request from the right household no longer moved a doubtful paper through the office. The treasury had rules, and Cato had taken the trouble to learn them before anyone could persuade him that a favor was simply the way business was done. By the end of the term, the office itself looked different. People said Cato had given the quaestorship the dignity of a consulship. He had not made public money clean by admiring poverty or pretending wealth did not matter. He had treated money as something that mattered enough to be handled honestly, and not enough to purchase his judgment. The ledger could be corrected only after somebody sat down, learned how it worked, and refused to let the old entries decide what the next one had to be. As Cato's public career continued, three powerful Romans began cooperating: Pompey, Caesar, and Crassus. Their private alliance joined military reputation, money, and political reach outside the ordinary balance of the Republic. Cato opposed the measures that followed, and became especially concerned by the bargain between Pompey and Caesar. The two men did not need to agree about Rome forever. They needed only to help one another long enough to become stronger than the institutions meant to restrain them. Cato tried the usual tools available to a senator. He spoke, delayed votes, opposed grants of land and extensions of command, and sometimes had to keep objecting after an official pulled him down from the rostra. The work was repetitive and rarely glorious. A republic can be weakened by one dramatic seizure, but it can also be weakened by a long series of votes that each arrive dressed as an exception. Cato kept returning for the next one. When another law concerning Caesar's provinces and armies came forward, Cato addressed Pompey directly. He warned that Pompey was lifting Caesar onto his own shoulders without understanding the weight. By the time he felt it, Cato said he would no longer have the strength to carry Caesar or the power to put him down, and both men would fall upon the city. It was not a vague prophecy. Pompey was helping to enlarge the rival he might later need to restrain. Caesar's influence continued to grow, and Pompey slowly came to fear the power he had helped increase. By then the alliance had already changed what each man could do. Cato kept opposing Caesar's commands and arguing that armed power had to return to civil control. He did not stop the movement. The useful part of his example is not that he predicted every turn perfectly. It is that seeing a bad pattern early did not excuse him from returning when the next decision arrived. Cato eventually ran for consul. He had persuaded the Senate to require candidates to canvass in person, rather than use agents, which deprived voters of both gifts and the pleasure of granting favors through intermediaries. Then he proved poor at canvassing for himself. He would not use the customary greetings and courtship that helped a Roman candidate win affection, and he would not let his friends do it for him. The other candidates were respectable men, and Cato lost without evidence that the vote had been bought or stolen. The loss embarrassed his friends and family more than it seemed to embarrass Cato. He admitted the reason plainly. The people had rejected his manner. He would not change that manner merely to please them, and he would not offer himself for the same defeat again while remaining unchanged. There is stubbornness in that answer, as well as steadiness. Cato could accept the result without pretending he had nothing to learn, though the lesson he took was not the lesson a campaign advisor would have preferred. On the day of the defeat, Cato anointed himself and practiced ball in the Campus Martius. After the midday meal, he went down to the Forum, as he often did, without shoes or tunic, and walked with his companions. The election had not gone his way, but the afternoon still contained a field, a ball, a meal, and a walk. He used them. The public result had ended one course of action. It did not have to occupy every remaining hour. I think about that afternoon sometimes. A man in a dusty field, throwing a ball around with his friends on the worst day of his political life. Not because it is impressive. There is nothing impressive about a grown man playing ball. But most of us, when the day goes badly enough, will spend the whole evening running the result, replaying the conversation, rearranging the argument, rehearsing the version where we said the right thing at the right time, and the whole situation turned out differently, as if getting the imaginary version perfect could somehow reach backward through the hours and repair what already happened. And here was a man who caught the replay before it had a chance to start, walked outside into the actual afternoon, and used what was left of his day for something he enjoyed while the light was still good. Before we follow him into the desert, tell me where you're hearing the episode and what time it is there. I read every one. And if you'd like to find your way back here, follow the show. Think of it as leaving a lamp lit in the window for yourself. The sleep routine I use is written in the description. It is simply what I use, never a promise. Now let us stay with Cato, because the easier part of his life is finished. The years after that election were brutal for the Republic and for Cato. The alliance between Pompey and Caesar collapsed, and Rome tore itself in two. Cato joined Pompey and the Senate against Caesar, though he had spent years opposing Pompey as well. Then Pompey lost at Pharsalus and was killed in Egypt. When the news reached Cato on the coast of North Africa, the men with him would not accept another commander while Cato remained. He had given anyone who wanted to leave permission to go, but he would not abandon the people who stayed. He took command and led them toward the remaining Republican forces inland. It was winter when the force set out by land. Cato gathered many asses to carry water, drove cattle with the column, and brought chariots for the journey. He also brought members of the Scylli, people known to the Romans for treating snakebite. The crossing was not a lone philosopher walking into an empty desert. It was a moving population of soldiers, handlers, animals, wheels, provisions, and water containers, all of it dependent on keeping the same direction and pace. Water shaped the march before anyone took a step. Every container had weight. Every animal carrying it needed water too, and the livestock and chariots made the column safer while also making it larger and slower. A route that looked manageable on a map became a daily question of whether people, animals, and supplies could arrive together. Cato had spent years treating preparation as part of courage. Here, preparation had hooves, axles, and a line of water vessels moving through winter country. Cato led from the front and went on foot. For 7 days, he did not use a horse or a pack animal to carry him. That was the fact the column could see each morning. The commander who had assembled beasts to carry the water would not place himself on one of them. He did not remove the hardship or pretend every man bore it equally. He simply accepted the road under his own feet while asking the force to follow. 7 consecutive days is long enough for a gesture to stop being theatre. The first morning on foot might be admired. By the 4th, it is simply where the commander is. The force moved behind the animals carrying water, the cattle and chariots, and the men who knew the dangers of the region. Cato stayed at the head without climbing onto a mount. The habit from his younger years had reached its hardest use. Not discomfort chosen on a Roman street, but discomfort accepted while other people's progress depended on his steadiness. One story from the crossing has lasted. After wind and heat had left the soldiers thirsty, a small stream was found, and a soldier collected a little water in his helmet. He carried it to Cato, while the men around him were still dry-mouthed. The offer placed the commander's comfort ahead of theirs, perhaps out of loyalty, perhaps simply because armies teach men an order, even for thirst. Cato did speak, and not gently. He asked whether the soldier thought him softer than the rest, or the only man unable to bear the heat, and he called it a punishment that one man should drink while everyone around him thirsted. Then, angry at the distinction being offered to him, he emptied the helmet. It is not a soft scene. Cato's solidarity came with severity, and the soldier who had tried to help received both. The water was left for the company, and the march continued. Cato later took charge of Utica, a port city on the North African coast. He strengthened its walls, brought in grain, and tried to protect its residents from the Roman forces stationed among them. Then news arrived at night that the Republican army had been destroyed at Thapsus, and Caesar was marching toward the city. People ran through the streets shouting. Cato went among them one by one, calming the panic until morning gave him enough light to gather the city's leaders and decide what could still be saved. The city did not agree on one course. Some wanted to resist, some wanted Caesar's mercy, and some hoped to protect themselves by handing over their neighbors. Cato did not force them into his own choice. He urged those seeking mercy to send quickly, persuaded horsemen to remain long enough for senators to escape, and kept the sea gate under order while transports were assigned. When departing soldiers began plundering the people of Utica, he ran after them and took back what they had seized. All through the night, and much of the following day, he helped people leave. He embraced friends at the water, supplied those who had no means, and checked that the ships could sail. His son would not go. A young man named Statilius would not go either, and Cato asked 2 philosophers to persuade him. There was no quiet ledger being balanced in an empty house. There were frightened people, disputed loyalties, ships at the sea gate, and a man doing practical work while those closest to him understood that he did not intend to save himself. Toward evening, Cato returned home, gathered his son and friends, and spoke with them. He warned his son away from Roman politics under Caesar, then went to bathe. Even in the bath, he called out to ask whether Statilius had finally agreed to leave. He had not. Cato smiled and said they would see about that presently. One dry sentence inside a house where nobody found the matter light. After the bath, he ate supper with a large company, his companions and the magistrates of Utica. They talked over wine, moving through literature and philosophy until the question became whether the good person alone is free. One of the philosophers objected. Cato answered with unusual force, loudly and at length. The company understood what the argument meant to him, and when he finished, the table fell silent. Cato tried to lift the mood by asking about the people still traveling, those at sea, and those taking the waterless land route. After supper he walked with his friends, gave orders to the watch, and embraced his son and each companion with more affection than usual. That kindness sharpened their fear. Then he went to his chamber, lay down, and opened Plato's Phaedo, the dialogue in which Socrates speaks with his friends about death and the soul. He read most of the dialogue, then looked above his head and saw that his sword was missing. His son had removed it during supper. Cato called a servant and asked who had taken it. The servant gave no answer, so Cato returned to the book. A little later, he asked for the sword again. No one brought it. He finished the dialogue and began calling the servants one by one, his voice growing louder. The calm scene did not remain calm. Cato struck one servant in anger and injured his own hand. He shouted that his household was leaving him unarmed for Caesar. His son ran in weeping, with friends behind him. And they embraced Cato, pleaded with him, and tried to change his mind. He answered them at length. Whatever composure he had shown in public, this was a house full of people struggling against his decision. 2 philosophers remained after the others left, and Cato spoke to them more gently. He asked whether they meant to keep him alive by force, and told them to persuade him if they believed his judgment was wrong. They could not answer without tears. Eventually, the sword was carried in by a child. Cato examined it, set it down, and returned to the Phaedo. He read the dialogue through again, then slept deeply enough for those outside to hear him. Near midnight he called for Clenthes, a physician, and had the injured hand bandaged. He also sent Brutus, his agent, down to the port to learn whether everyone had sailed. Brutus returned with news that one man remained, and a storm was rising. Cato sent him back to see whether anyone had been driven ashore and needed help. Even then, the practical attention had not left him. People around the house took the bandage and the port checks as signs that he might live. Before dawn, Cato died by suicide. His family and physician tried to save him. We can leave the physical details outside this quiet room, but we should not turn the death into a serene Stoic picture. It was not solitary, clean, or without resistance. His son pleaded with him. His friends wept. A servant was hurt. Cato injured his own hand, and the household fought to keep him alive. The people of Utica later honored the man who had protected them. But grief does not make his final act a lesson to copy. Cato's suicide is not the lesson of this episode, and it is not guidance for you. The part worth carrying into an ordinary night is much smaller. The brain that starts running numbers without being asked, the flinch of worry that fires before you have decided whether the danger is real. The time spent rehearsing a conversation that is still a year away. Cato practiced interrupting reflexes throughout his life, sometimes with admirable discipline, and sometimes with a severity that wounded the people beside him. Tonight you need only notice the thought and decline to follow it into the next room. So let us close the ledger, not Cato's, yours. Whatever you have been adding up since the light went out, whatever column of figures has been running in the back of your mind since you lay down, the bills, the appointments, the things that need doing tomorrow, the problem you keep turning over in search of an answer that is not available tonight. The pen can come down now. The column is finished. The entries are made. Some of them balanced, and some of them did not. And that is how most days go. And nothing that happens between now and morning is going to change the numbers. Close the book. Feel the cover settle against the pages. That heavy final sound a ledger makes when the last figure has been entered and the day's accounts are done. The ink is dry, the total is set. Checking it again will not improve it, and adding one more line at the bottom will not make the sum come out differently than it already has. The page is full. Let it be full. Set the book down on the table beside you, and let your hands come away from it. Tomorrow's ledger is there too, closed, with a blank page waiting. Leave it closed. The pen is not in your hand. Whatever numbers belong on that page, and there will be numbers, there are always numbers, They belong to the version of you that will wake up in the morning, rested, with a better light to work by, and the particular patience that comes from having slept, instead of having spent the night trying to solve tomorrow's arithmetic with tonight's tired mind. That person will open the book when the time comes. You do not need to open it for them. Let your hands go still. Let the desk clear itself, the way a work surface clears when the last person using it has finally stepped back and remembered that the night was not built for calculations. Whatever you left on the table will be there in the morning, exactly where you set it down. Patient the way numbers are always patient. They are not going anywhere. They do not require your attention between now and sunrise. The lamp can come down now. Let the circle of light narrow and soften and warm, the way the last light in a room settles when the work is over and the books are put away and there is nothing left to count or check. The walls go easy. The corners fill with the kind of quiet dark that has nowhere to be and nothing to prove, and no figures left to run. Let the room go still. Let it rest the way a room rests when the adding is finished, and the man who was adding has set his work down. Let your breathing settle into the pace of a room where the accounts are closed and nothing more is being calculated. The numbers have stopped. The pen is in its groove. The ledger is shut, and the man who was keeping it has put it aside, and the night has him now. The way the night takes everyone, eventually, when the arithmetic is done and the light comes down, and the body remembers that rest was never something you earned at the bottom of a column. It was something you were allowed, all along. Your eyes can close now, if they have not already. Let them. The evening is over. The books are closed. There is nothing left to add. Let yourself rest the way a man rests when the final entry is written, and the ink is dry, and there is nothing owed, and nothing owing, and the pen is in its groove, and the lamp is low, and the only work remaining is sleep. Bare feet on cold stone, and the walking goes on. The ledger balanced and closed, the ball thrown in the dust on the worst afternoon, the water poured into the sand and the sun taking it back, the lamp burning low over a closed book, the pen set down, the accounts finished, the good long dark. The frost and the walking, the dust and the throwing, the water and the sand, the lamp turned low, the page filled, the ledger closed, the night. Bare feet on cold stone, and the walking goes on. The ledger balanced and closed, the ball thrown in the dust on the worst afternoon, the water poured into the sand and the sun taking it back, the lamp burning low over a closed book, the pen set down, the accounts finished, the good long dark. The frost and the walking, the dust and the throwing, the water and the sand, the lamp turned low, the page filled, the ledger closed, the night. The accounts are finished. Nothing more is owed tonight. Sleep well,